People are always asking me, why did you write Unlikeable? Do we really need another book about that woman, Hillary Clinton? And I say, think about this. Hillary Clinton has been married for more than 40 years to what Charlie Rose calls the best political animal in America, Bill Clinton. And yet, she hasn't absorbed, as far as I can tell, a single one of his talents as a politician. And being a politician is important. Abraham Lincoln was a good politician. Franklin Roosevelt was surely a good politician. Ronald Reagan was a great politician. It's important to be a good politician if you want to get stuff done in Washington. And Hillary is a lousy politician. But think about this also. She spent 8 years in the United States Senate, 4 years as Secretary of State, and recently she was asked by a television interviewer, Mrs. Clinton, can you please tell us your greatest accomplishment? And she couldn't come up with one example of an accomplishment. This is a woman who doesn't have any accomplishments. And then finally, think about this. In my view, all of our recent presidents, Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, whether you like him or not, all of them had one thing in common, putting aside their politics. They all made contact with everyday Americans. They had charisma. They had something special. They were likable. At least at the beginning, they were likable. Hillary's missing that chip. She's not likable. So here you have somebody who is a lousy politician, no accomplishments, not likable, and yet she's on her way to becoming the Democratic nominee, unless either her health or an indictment beforehand stops her, and we can talk about that later with the Q&A session. So we've got to take her seriously. We have to take her seriously. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, Hillary Clinton, I hate her, you know, I don't want to think about her, she belongs in jail, all of that. That may all be true, but folks, she probably is going to be the Democratic nominee. We're going to have a Republican nominee. She and the Clinton operation, the Clinton juggernaut, are powerful. They're going to give the Republicans a real run for their money. So I think it's important for us to acknowledge that. That's why I wrote the book. And I think that's something we should all think about very seriously. Now, it's not only I who think Hillary is unlikable. Bill Clinton thinks she's unlikable. How do I know that? Before she announced that she was going to run for president, at a dinner party that was attended by a number of their friends, some of whom I interviewed, Bill expressed some concern, some very deep concern, about her performance in public, that she wasn't very good on her feet, that she didn't give very good speeches, that she didn't make contact with her audience, that she wasn't very likable. So he said, this is according to my sources, why don't we ask Steven for help? And Steven is Steven Spielberg, the Hollywood director. What he suggested at this dinner party was that Hillary enlist Steven Spielberg to help her get some acting coaches. And she said, acting coaches? I get $200,000 to $300,000 for a speech, and these Hollywood schmucks are going to tell me how to do it? Anyway, she relented, and she set up a video camera in the den of her home in Chappaqua, New York, which is a suburb of New York City, and she practiced speaking in front of this camera. She sent the videos to the Spielberg office in Hollywood. He, in turn, sent these videos to these acting coaches, and they looked at the videos and then sent back to Hillary their critiques. And you can imagine what they said. She didn't like it one little bit, because Hillary does not like to be criticized, and Hillary, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, has a ferocious temper. And I think it's very important, because you don't see a lot of that in public, but behind the scenes it's very, very evident. And she took the video camera in her den and the tripod, and she smashed them on the floor and stamped on them. And when her friends came to visit and looked at this smashed video camera, they said, "What in the world is that all about?" And she said, "That is the end of my method acting period." So that she didn't do any more of that practicing to be likable. Now, it's not only Bill Clinton who thinks she's not likable. Barack Obama doesn't think she's very likable. Let me tell you a little bit about the Obamas and the Clintons. For several months prior to her announcement that she was running for president, Bill Clinton got word from his friends in the mainstream media, and he has a lot of friends in the mainstream media. In fact, I think we all would agree that the mainstream media is a fully owned subsidiary of Clinton Incorporated. And these mainstream media people told Bill that the leaks were coming from one place, the White House. The leaks about her emails, the leaks about her taking donations to the Clinton Foundation, the leaks about Sidney Blumenthal, they could all be traced ultimately back to the Oval Office and to one person, Valerie Jarrett. I just heard somebody say Valerie Jarrett. There you are. Yeah. Right. So Hillary asked for a one-on-one meeting with Barack Obama, alone in the Oval Office, to complain and to do something about it. Obama didn't like the idea one little bit, because he knew what he was in for, but eventually he relented, said, "Okay, come on over to the Oval Office." She did. Lo and behold, who was there? Valerie Jarrett. It wasn't a one-on-one, it was a two-on-one. And just so you know how I know about this, since there were only three people in the room, the president, Valerie Jarrett, and Hillary Clinton, later, Valerie Jarrett talked to her friends about this. Hillary talked to her friends about this. I talked to those friends. I double-checked the quotes, and that's how I know what went on in this meeting. Well, Hillary started off by saying she had done nothing wrong by having this private email system. It was all a conspiracy against the Clintons. Poor Clintons. There's always a witch hunt against the Clintons. And she complained and complained to Obama about how she was the victim, as she always sees herself, as the victim. And Obama, who doesn't particularly like Hillary, to put it mildly, sat there stony-faced behind his big oak resolute desk, not saying a word, letting Hillary talk. And the more she talked, the more angry she became. And this ferocious temper that I've mentioned started bubbling up. And finally, she turned to him and she said, "What I want you to do is call off your effing dogs, Barack." Calling him Barack in the Oval Office, which you don't do no matter what you think of the president. You respect the office and you call him Mr. President, and she didn't. According to these sources, Barack Obama got up from his desk, turned around, looked out the window at the Rose Garden, then turned back to Hillary and said, "Hillary, you've brought all these problems on yourself, and there's absolutely nothing I can do to help you. And that was the end of the meeting. Now, there's another story that tells you a lot about Obama and Hillary that I'd like to tell you. After the Benghazi tragedy, in which we lost 4 Americans, including our ambassador, Barack Obama called Hillary Clinton and asked her to appear on the 5 Sunday TV talk shows. And not only that, but to use the talking points that the White House had devised. And these talking points were, as you all know, that this was a spontaneous demonstration caused by a video, anti-Muslim video. Well, of course, we now know for sure, I knew, by the way, I wrote this a long time ago, but we now know since the recent Benghazi hearings that Hillary knew quite the opposite, because she had emailed Chelsea and told her right after this was a terrorist attack, an al-Qaeda-linked terrorist attack. So she knew that these talking points were a lie, and she didn't know quite what to do. So she got on the phone, as she often does, and called Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton spends a great deal of his time in Little Rock. He has a library there, and on the 5th floor of the library, he has a penthouse apartment. It's a very luxurious penthouse apartment, and he throws a lot of parties up there, which we can also talk about later in Q&A, what goes on in those parties. And she said to him, the president wants me to do this, and he said, don't do anything until I get home. He climbed on one of his $60 million private jets that he rents all the time, traipses around the world in these jets, and he flew back to Washington, went to their mansion, Whitehaven, in the embassy section of Washington, and they had a discussion. Now, this discussion took place in front of several aides and friends whom I interviewed. He said to her, according to these sources, there is no way I'm going to let you do this, because this is a trap. If you go on these Sunday talk shows and then run for president, they're going to use all this stuff against you. They're going to have these videos of you on the Sunday talk shows. You can't do it. I'm ordering you not to do it. Now, Hillary, with her ferocious temper, blew up at him and said, nobody tells me what to do. Nobody orders me around. And they had one of these knockdown, drag-out fights that they always have in front of their friends. And eventually, Bill said, look, it's a trap, you can't do it. And she said, I know it's a trap. And Bill said, you have to say no. And she said, well, how do you say no to the president? And he said, it's easy. You say N period, O period, no. And that's what Hillary did. She turned down the president. And that, my friends, is what we've got to do. All of us in this room. When she runs for president after she's nominated, if she is nominated, we've got to say N period, O period, no to Hillary. Thank you very much.
Well, as you point out, we can sit here and titillate ourselves with all this gossip about Hillary, but she is going to be the nominee. And it doesn't make much difference what we think about her, it's what the other people think about her. And you got to look at the fact that she acquitted herself rather well in 11 hours of testimony before a congressional committee. She looked pretty good on the debate that she had on national television. The question is, who do you think in the Republican lineup can beat Hillary, and what do you think the strategy should be? Should the nominee run against her?
I'm sorry?
Should the nominee of the Republican Party run against her, or should he run on some particular platform of action?
Well, with all due respect, sir, it's not gossip, what I just told you. This is based on a lot of reporting that I've done over the last 10 years with Hillary, I think I've interviewed well over 1,000 people. The last group of people I interviewed, one of them, I interviewed 24 times. So I think this is really solid information, and I hope it gives you an insight into her character and what it looks like behind the scenes. Now, to answer your question, I think the Republican nominee needs to do both. I think he or she, and it probably will be a he, needs to have a forward-looking policy in which the Republicans put forward their plan for how to move this country forward. I don't think it can all be negative. I think it has to be positive. I think it has to be Reagan-esque in the sense it has to be sunny, and here we go, where this is going to be a great country again, and here's why, here's what I'm going to do. But I would also say that given the fact that these campaigns are in fact a choice, that this candidate also has to remind the voters that this is a woman who has consistently lied to us, consistently obscured the truth, consistently at least walked the edge of illegality, if not actually crossed over it, and I think that needs to be hit very hard during this campaign.
And who do you think is best able to do that in the Republican nominees?
Well, rather than give you my idea of who's the best, let me tell you who Bill Clinton thinks who's the best. Again, based on some reporting that I did, the Clintons had a dinner party not so long ago. Several people attended. I interviewed a couple of them. And Bill went through each and every one of the Republican aspirants, if you want to call them that. And when he got to Marco Rubio, he said, I think he may pose the greatest threat to you, Hillary, who is there, because number one, he's young, and you've got a problem with the fact that you're going to be 69 when you run. He represents a generational change, and you and I are often associated with not even the 1990s, but even the 1960s. Saul Alinsky, I know we've been talking about Saul Alinsky before during lunch. He represents the future, and most important of all, he's Hispanic. And no Democrat is going to get elected unless they get the majority of the Hispanic vote, and he could siphon off a lot of Hispanic votes. So he considered Marco Rubio her greatest threat.
Thank you.
My question concerns the national security considerations of the email. Many of us who've had security clearances have signed a waiver that we acknowledge certain rules and we'll obey them. What do you think is the probability, in light of the fact that Hillary antagonized some of the professional investigators by joking about the investigation, that it will ever come to closure with any prosecution, and to what extent higher levels would have to authorize that, or whether the investigators, if they feel that they've been stymied by higher-ups, would go public?
Very good question, and I'm asked this question frequently, and I have to confess that virtually all of my conservative friends think that when push comes to shove, Barack Obama is going to step in and prevent her from getting indicted because he has influence over his attorney general, and the fix is going to be in. I'm not so sure that's true, and I tell you why I think that. Number one, the director of the FBI, James Comey, has a wonderful reputation on both sides of the aisle in Washington as a straight shooter, somebody who is not susceptible to political influence. And I think he will, and the FBI will, carry this investigation out in an honest and complete way. Once the FBI is finished with this investigation, they then makes a referral to the Justice Department. Here's what we've got. This is what we found. There are 8 prosecutors right now in the Justice Department who are working and collaborating with the FBI on this investigation. All of them are civil servants. None of them are political appointees. They'll come to a conclusion based on the facts, I think, whether or not, if it looks as though there's material there for an indictment, can they prove this to a jury? And prosecutors do not take cases to a jury unless they think they can win. If they think they can indict her, they will then recommend to Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, who was indeed appointed by Barack Obama, that she should be indicted on whatever cause, whether she misled the FBI, for instance, by lying to the FBI, which is a federal offense, or whether she trampled on several federal laws having to do with the handling of classified national security information. I'm told by my sources that Valerie Jarrett has warned the president time and time again, there's nothing you can do about this. It's in process. If you interfere, it will be considered to be obstruction of justice. And if that gets leaked, and it almost certainly would get leaked, as you indicated, by some very angry FBI guys, and maybe some people in the Justice Department, it would be a tremendous blotch on the last several months of his administration, and maybe even more, because it would probably be an even impeachable offense if he did that. So it's my conclusion from all of this, and this is now a guess, that there's a good 50-50 chance that she may be indicted. I'm not saying she will be, but I think we can't dismiss this as a real possibility.
Thank you.
When Hillary ran for Senate, she was tough on crime, tough on the border. Well, now, 15 years later, she's done a 180. She's opened borders, Obamacare for all illegal immigrants, pandering to Black Lives Matter. Does Hillary Clinton have a belief system on the issues beyond simply what does she have to say to attain power?
Here's where I agree with Barack Obama on one thing. The Obamas believe Hillary has no principles. And I don't believe she has any principles either. I think it's all about power. I think she'll go wherever the wind blows. And right now the wind is blowing in her party way over to the left, in Bernie Sanders. 56% of the Democrats who were recently polled said they see absolutely nothing wrong with socialism. 56% of the Democrats. She is challenged because of her reputation as a centrist Democrat in the past by the left wing of the party, and that's where the heart and soul of the Democratic Party is now, way over in the left. So she has tacked, as we've all seen, to the left in every way she could possibly do. She's been against TARP. She's been against the trade agreement with Asia. She's been against Keystone. You can go on and on and on. Things that she's reversed herself on. My view is that if she ever came into power, it's anybody's guess what she would do. I certainly don't think you could count on her having any principles to carry out. And I think this is a very dangerous thing in a president, because we need a president who has a vision. And we saw when she was Secretary of State, she had no vision whatsoever. Her great accomplishments in office as Secretary of State were Libya, which is now this breeding ground of the Islamic State, the reset with Russia, which resulted in Vladimir Putin taking over Crimea and a chunk of Ukraine and also the Middle East, and of course the pivot to Asia, which has prompted China to build a whole series of islands in the South China Sea and militarize them. These are Hillary Clinton's accomplishments. Thank you.
Hi. My question has to do with Uma Abedin. I used to think that Uma Abedin laid out Hillary's clothes and made her travel arrangements.
She did,
and
at one point.
But Yeah, and that's what I'm getting to. Because when some of her emails came out around when they were having the Benghazi hearings, it dawned on me that Uma Abedin, whose family has a history of the Muslim Brotherhood, might be doing the Secretary of State's work. And so if she's President of the United States and Uma sticks around,
Yes.
what can you say to comment that maybe we could bring up this issue so that Hillary won't be president?
This issue has, of course, been brought up and knocked down by a lot of Democrats, as you know. Just briefly, Huma, when she was in college, was an editor of this Muslim Brotherhood magazine. Her parents, father, mother, are part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Her mother now teaches in Saudi Arabia and is an extremist. Huma, on the other hand, also started off as an intern in the White House when the Clintons were there and insinuated herself into the Clinton inner circle, is one of Hillary's most important advisors during this campaign. And we don't know. We just simply don't know what she's advising and to what degree her family influence, by the way, she grew up in Saudi Arabia. She spoke Arabic, I believe, before she spoke English. This is a very troubling relationship that she has with Hillary Clinton. There have been efforts to prove that she's a spy, that she's insinuated herself into the Clinton circle and is advocating all kinds of pro-Palestinian and anti-Israeli sentiments. It's very hard to prove, but certainly there's a lot of smoke, and generally when there's smoke, there's fire.
We're going to try to get these three final questions. Kaz will get the last question.
One can't help but notice in listening to...
I'm sorry?
One can't help but notice in listening to Hillary that she's very careful these days when she's interviewed in speaking about jihad. She uses the word jihad. She will not say Islamic terrorism. So she is really walking the line there. And I'd like your opinion, because my opinion is that I think Obama, she knows Obama can pull that tripwire for her at any time once the FBI investigation comes in. I think that she has to say exactly what he says, follow his party line, or he'll take her down, and then they'll put in Joe Biden, and Joe Biden will have saved several months of having to campaign.
A lot of what Hillary says these days has to do with her trying to stay in sync with the Democratic base, which I just described as being way over to virtually the socialist left. There is this feeling among the base of the party that they're in favor of Black Lives Matter. Hillary is in favor of Black Lives Matter. They're in favor of never calling Islamic terrorism by its right name, because this would somehow smear all Muslims, which it wouldn't, of course. And a whole variety of things that she's doing in order to ingratiate herself with this base that she's afraid will not come out in droves and vote for her. She needs not only to say the right things, but she has to encourage the enthusiasm of the base in order to get them off their you-know-what and into the voting booths. And I think a lot of what she's saying today, including all these efforts to fuzz the truth, has to do with pleasing the base of the Democratic Party. What she really believes, who knows? As we said before, where truth lies with Hillary Clinton is impossible to know. You know, not only has she hidden her emails in a private server in the basement of her home in Chappaqua, but when she was First Lady in the White House, she set up a whole separate telephone system that circumvented the switchboard, very similar to the email thing, in the sense that no one would know what she said and to whom she said it and what she said. So she is a very slippery character, and it's very hard to pin her down.
I think a case can be made for Obama preferring a Republican in the White House to Hillary. He'd probably have a better chance of being invited back in. That being the case, and we know he has whatever it would take to bring her down, do you think maybe he's just going to let that happen and bring in his friend Joe at the last minute? Or what do you think the possibility of that is?
I actually wrote a blog about this recently on my website, edwardklein.com, in which I said that Obama would almost prefer a Republican in the White House to Hillary. And why? This gets to why there is this blood feud between the Clintons and the Obamas. It's about ideology, and it's about personal animosity and all of that, but it's also about money and power. If the Clintons return to the White House, they will then take over the Democratic National Committee. The Democratic National Committee is in control of literally thousands of jobs across the United States. Millions and millions of dollars of commissions to pollsters, campaign advisors, all kinds of people. Obama feels if the Clintons are in charge of that Democratic National Committee, he will be blocked out. He will be kept out by the Clintons. He'll have no influence, and he will become a kind of a has-been. So there's a kind of House of Cards or Game of Thrones battle going on. Really almost a life and death struggle between the Clintons and the Obamas over power, over money, over the future of the Democratic Party and the direction of that party. So in many ways, Obama would be much better off if a Republican were in the White House, because he would still be the titular head of the Democratic Party, not the Clintons. The Clintons would be history. If Hillary loses, what happens? The Clintons lose all their power, the money to the foundation dries up, they're going nowhere, and Obama still is now the head of the party. So in many ways, I think his heart would be with a Republican, but it's very hard for him, of course, to say that in public or even to have it come out and people to suspect that. But I have no doubt that he has thought about this very deeply.
Would it be too late to bring in Biden, though, if that happens?
I think it's too late to bring in Biden unless Hillary falters on two counts, which I think I may have alluded to earlier in my talk. One is her health, which we could go into for half an hour, but we won't, which is not anywhere near as good as she's let on. Bill Clinton has urged her to travel with a doctor because he's concerned about her having another blood clot, fainting spell. She has trembling of her hands, blinding headaches, dizziness, all kinds of symptoms that we don't know about that her friends talk about. Or if she's indicted and has to drop out, and then, of course, Joe could come in.
Thank you.
Okay, the last question.
How in the world are you able to get Hillary's friends to rat her out when they must know it's going to turn up in a book?
Good question. I'm asked that all the time. My first book on Hillary was published 20 years ago, 1996. Actually, I started working on it in 1994. I've interviewed maybe 1,000 people, as I think I mentioned to you before. A lot of these people love to talk about their connection to the high and the mighty. It makes them feel very important. I mean, it's human nature. And if you cultivate them carefully and over a long period of time, as I have over the last 20 years, promise them anonymity, promise to listen to them out, keep your mouth shut and let them talk, they will tell you how important they are. I was in Chappaqua, the Clinton home. Really? Yeah. What did you do there? Well, I saw Hillary do blah, 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 blah. Or I was in Whitehaven, which is also a Clinton home in Washington. Or I was with Hillary on the road, and I saw her and Bill. You know, they don't get along too well. It goes on and on and on. The same with the Obama people. Valerie Jarrett, who knows everything that goes on in the White House, has a number of friends. I've played tennis with these friends. I've gone ice fishing with these friends. I've helped them clean out their office when they were moving. This is how journalists work. I mean, if you've ever seen the movie All the President's Men, I think you might recall Dustin Hoffman kind of pretending that butter wouldn't melt in his mouth and that he was just being nice to his sources, but obviously we try to put people at their ease, to make them feel comfortable, to trust me, and they have, and they've talked. But the most important thing about this is that over all these years, these sources have proved time and time again to be accurate. The ones who have not been accurate, I don't go back to. So I'm very confident that these sources are giving us the very deepest insight into what goes on behind the scenes.